I remember speaking to you years ago. This might have been like 2007 or something, and you were saying, yeah, it looks like Buddy Bradley's going to be a series, and then I saw you again in 2010, and you're like, yeah, it didn't look, it's not looking like that's going to happen, and
Right.
I feel like so many people in the comics industry and even publishers in the comics industry, the business model feels like, all right, we do these things called comics. They don't make any money. We'll probably lose money on them. But if we can pick up an option, then we'll make some money, and that'll pay for some of the other projects that won't make money. And if we really score, it'll be made into a movie. And
Right.
it, it's a tricky industry when one Hollywood movie is making more than the whole comic book industry,
Yeah.
and
Sure.
I think a lot of us, like I said, we're making comics for love, but those of us that are hoping to make money, we're hoping even for situations like yours where we get some option monies, even if it's not made into a movie. And I can imagine the frustration you've had, this feeling of hopefulness, oh, I got this nice paycheck and maybe something fun will happen, and I like the person that wants to do something with it. And it sounds like with you over and over, things are maybe going to happen and then they don't, and then they're maybe going to happen. And I'm curious if you got excited enough where you started, putting comics aside to write screenplays and be meeting with people and reading, what's being made. Like, how involved have you been over the years trying to
Yeah.
make it a reality?
No matter how, no matter what I'd be told about, oh yeah, this is definitely going to be turned into a TV show. I never bought into that notion so much that I would stop doing comics. I still always, showbiz has never completely distracted me from doing comics. When it would, it's like when I would have a development deal. A development deal involves labor, so then I would have to put my own comics aside, even if it was just part of each day, to work on a script that I'm getting paid to write, or to work on a storyboard that I'm getting paid to draw. So I'd be working on these things, but I'm getting paid to do it. That's part of the deal when you sign a development deal, is they put you to work. And it's good paying work, but you're still working on it. But probably the first time I went down this road was probably the most excited, or excited is the wrong word, the most optimistic I was that something was going to happen. And that was especially because you're constantly being told that by everybody that you're working with. You're constantly, they might believe it, or they might be just saying it just so that you keep your best foot forward, that I proceed, I'll be more excited, and that will show in the work, whatever it is I'm doing, that I believe this is going to happen, and therefore here I go. But of course, I knew there was always a chance, an excellent chance, that it wasn't going to get greenlit, and then it didn't. The circumstances leading up to that point were very maddening, and that is the hardest thing. The hardest thing of all is, in contrast to the love fest that is the comic book industry, Hollywood, TV, movies, that's a really different animal. And I've met people in that world that I like. I've worked with people that I like personally, still friends with them. But everybody lies. Sometimes they lie out of malice. Sometimes they lie just to protect your feelings. But in that business, every single person lies 100% of the time. So now and that's just it. It's like, if I suddenly have a new development deal and I'm going down that road again, I'm always willing to do it for the money. And of course, there's that brass ring to reach for. Maybe I'll get a TV show, and that'll be terrific. So it's like, all right, I'll do this for the money. But I, especially over time, I know you've got to not take anything that anybody says too literally or too seriously. They're going to tell you all kinds of things. But they still drive me crazy, though, because you still have work to do. You still be like, you still are like, okay, here's what I've worked on so far. What do you think? What should I change? Should I redo anything? Or what do you want for me to do now? And the response is a bunch of bullshit. And I still would like blow a gasket because it's like, I still have to work on this. And you're bullshitting me. I can't respond to bullshit. You know, don't tell me this is fine. And then when I find out later you all hated it. If you're hating it now, tell me right now. You know, it's like that's the worst is when, just like going all the way back to the woman who told me she had a problem with people named Peter. It's like, give me the bad news. Give me the, you know, if you think what I handed in is terrible, one, say so. B, tell me how to fix it, you know? And don't just say, oh, this is fine. And then amongst each other say, oh, this is toast. You know? This sucks. Or if it's toast for another reason, tell me now. Just tell me if it's toast. And just so I know, it's good to know these things. It's good to know the truth. Tell me the fucking truth. It's impossible for them. And I know it sounds like I'm making the worst generalization, and maybe I've had the worst luck. Maybe when it comes to dealing with people in Hollywood, I've just had really bad luck. But almost everybody I know is not, that I've worked, every single person I've worked with in Hollywood, not one person has always been totally straight with me. Not one person. And again, like I said, lots of times it's to protect my feelings, but you know, I'm a big boy now. and it would make it always makes everything so much worse for me. You know, I could see how they're like, somebody who I'm talking to would know, oh, that at a meeting that you didn't even know was happening, it's been decided there's no way we're going to greenlit your project. But they probably would say, but don't tell Peter that, because we want him best foot forward. We want him to keep working on it. He's contractually obliged to. We'll own the script. You know, we're paying it for him, so we'll own a script. He's got to finish that script. It's in his contract. So don't give him the bad news, because he might quit or just type, "All work is no play makes John a dull boy." But you know, that's just it too. It's like, I wish they would tell me that. It's like, I could read my contract. I know I got to finish this thing. I'll finish it, you know, and I'll try to make it good. But at least, because then while I'm working on it, there won't be that little tiny part of my brain going, I might have a TV show. When the truth is, it's already been decided that there's no fucking way I'm going to have a TV show. Just tell me that, you know? It really is maddening. As you can see, my blood pressure's rising. Just talking about them. And every single time I sign a deal, and it's also maddening dealing with lawyers and agents. That also it's all just stuff that prevents you from going to sleep. It just makes steam come out of my ears. And every single time I sign a development deal, I always say, don't let any of this get to you. You know the drill. You're always going for these long walks where people are pointing at you and say, that man is cursing. I always tell myself, don't let it get to you. You know what's going to happen. You know what to expect. And it still gets to me. It still gets to me every single time.
I had a very small experience, nothing to compare with yours, but one of the toughest aspects for me is putting all this time aside, a year or whatever, and then the year's over and you have nothing to show for it, right? So it's like you just, oh, what have you been up to? I haven't seen any of your books come out the last year. Oh, I've been working really hard and I have nothing to show for it.
Right. Well, for me, that's a big problem with, even when I'm doing comic books, like since I stopped doing hate, and aside from like the Marvel and DC stuff I've done that we talked about, I've done 3 full-length graphic novels, actual novels. I've done 4 full-length biographical comic books. I work regularly for Reason magazine, and there's one full big collection of the comics I've done for them. And eventually there'll be another one, I'm sure, unless I die soon. But so often, even like with fans of mine, longtime friends of mine, like recently, for the first time in almost 20 years, I saw Robert Crumb, and he's just like, what have you been doing? Have you been doing nothing? It's like, no, I have 1 million books out. There's so many comic books. There's so many books. There's so many graphic novels. There's tons of them. And Pete, I'll be, every time I'm talking to some old friend, they'll be apologetic and say, Pete, I see that you have all these biographical comics and I've never read them. And it's like, who has the time? Who has the money? Of course you didn't read it. I didn't read your stuff either. There's too much material. Who can keep up? That's why it's like, again, walking into a Comic-Con, it's like, all right, we got to settle this. There's too many of us. This has gotten insane.
Yeah, it used to be you'd go to the Fantagraphics booth and you'd go to the Drawn and Quarterly booth and you'd pick up everything you need. And now there's so many publishers and you go back the next year and maybe that publisher's gone.
Right. And also so many cartoonists who self-publish, print on demand. They'll only print up enough comic books to sell at that comic convention, But yeah, it's just all the individual artists with their own booths. It is, especially when you go to indie shows, it's when I wonder, why are you doing this? It's like, I feel like lots of times at certain shows, I'll feel like this has barely been worth it for me, but all my expenses have been covered. And it's like, you guys, you paid for your table, paid for your hotel room, you had to get yourself here. I'll ask you, how's business? You'll say no good. So it's like, what are you doing here? Why do you bother? But the why, such a big reason is it's social. It's a big party. Everybody wants to meet like-minded people, especially if you come from, I don't want to trash any particular part of the country, but if you're from some smaller town, some smaller city, where you might know, where you could count on one hand how many people are even remotely interested in alternative comics. It's great to go to a place where you're just in this sea of people who are completely immersed in it. So, I mean, that's got to be the big appeal,
I think the drive to create your own work and it really is like a family where once every month or every 3 months, all the same people are in Seattle, and then they're all in San Diego, and then they're all,
right.
Each of the cons, we follow each other, we check up on each other. We're the ones buying each other's books. Right. It feels like, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Brooklyn is ridiculous. There's way too many cartoonists in Brooklyn. That's gotten out of hand.
So I was just going to say one last thing about the films, and that is, the Crumb documentary came out, and it was a kind of a surprise big hit, and then that was followed with Klaus's film and Picard's film, and you were kind of, it felt like kind of in the hub of that, so I can see how that first time there would have been that kind of hope and anticipation, and then it seems like it kind of petered out for everybody at that point,
Yeah, well, I guess it's been a couple of years since I've had an actual development deal, but even just 2 years ago, I was working on two development deals at the same time going, and so pretty much every time one development deal dies, one or an option lapses, of course a part of me thinks, well, that's it, especially when it first happened. It's like, this isn't going to happen again, but it still kept happening up until recently. People first started offering to option my work back in like 1994, so it was like 25 years where people were I always had something that was optioned. But yeah, it's been 2 years since I've had anything optioned. So maybe this is it. Maybe I am. Maybe it is all over.
So I just had one more question, and you kind of mentioned how you've been doing the biographical comics, and it feels like your career has kind of turned in that direction. And I'd love to hear how you got, obviously, Hate is semi-autobiographical, but you're really going that direction. It feels like lately, and I'm curious if these are just you found this really fascinating work, doing the research and all that, or if these were jobs people said we need someone to do this, how you went that way, and I'm curious also how that works with your fan base, kind of switching gears, how the career's going, making these kind of changes.
Well, I started, for various reasons and for various publishers, I started doing an increasing amount of nonfiction work, like journalistic pieces, and then the journalistic pieces started to morph into more biographical pieces. A lot of them were like just little one-page things that I did for various publications. And I quickly realized that this is writing nonfiction, writing about things that actually happened, is way more interesting than fiction. It's like, why am I making stuff up when what actually happened, nobody would believe if I said it was fiction. But it's a whole different animal, especially doing biographical comics. So I had to get my feet wet first, by doing like these like one pagers and what to emphasize, what not to emphasize. How to focus in on what's important about this character that I should write about. But once I felt like I had it figured out, then I decided to do some full-length biographical comics. And I really enjoy them. I'm very proud of them. I'm really happy with the way they all came out. It's my finest work. But when you consider the research involved, I'll spend almost a year only researching it, and that's before you've even started writing it. So with most comics, if I'm making stuff up, you just make it up in your head, you write it down, and then you draw it. But with the biographical stuff, there's that research step. I'm always terrified that somebody's going to spot something in one of my bio comics and say, no, you got that wrong, or this is wrong. So far, that's only from somebody who is an expert, a scholar, because I'm not a scholar. I'm relying on the work of actual scholars. I let them do the heavy lifting, do the excavating, and I'll just pick through what they came up with. So only once did it was a scholar of Margaret Sanger, and she took issue with a couple of things. And it mainly had to do with me trying to simplify. I oversimplified in a certain, but she felt like by oversimplifying, I simultaneously distorted. And, I felt like she had a good point, but I'm grateful that doesn't happen more often. Another problem with investing so much time in these biographical works is if anybody wants to, if Hollywood comes a calling for that, they'll say, yeah, we loved that Zora Neale Hurston book you made, and we assume that you're the sole rights owner. And I'm like, I don't own Zora Neale Hurston. She's not a licensed property. So it's like, if you want to work with me and use my biography as a jumping off point, I'll gladly work with you, work on a screenplay. But yeah, if it's but if you're just talking about the rights, anybody could make a movie about a dead person. Just have at it. And it's kind of ridiculous that I'm so honest about it, because that's always the last conversation. They go, oh yeah, okay, and then I never hear from them again. Ed Piskor also, I think he sold the rights to the name Hip Hop Family Tree to somebody, but they wanted to option the book. And he says, yeah, well, they were ready to give me a lot of money, so I licensed the use of that name. And he goes, and I got good money for it, but I said, but as for the rest of the book, and he's like, I don't own Dr. Dre. He goes, all the people in there, they're human. He goes, Hurston at least is dead. He goes, everybody in my book, almost all of them are still alive. It's like, I can't sell their stories.
Yeah. Um, this is getting back to what we talked about with so the audience, and I've often felt like comics, if we're going to survive, obviously there's the people making them that make them because they love them, and will probably do it even if the money goes away. But if we want the industry to survive, how do we get new readers to notice what we're doing and enjoy what we're doing? And it seems to me like nonfiction and biographies like you're doing are a potential way to reach out to people that might not have thought to read comics, and say, hey, look, we're doing some fun stuff here. And I'm curious, similar to the Hulk Spider-Man, if you've picked up new fans who are like, oh, I noticed this book and I wouldn't have picked up a comic, or, oh, and now that got me back looking at your other work and I'm really enjoying, have you seen any of that?
Well, with a lot of, the biggest bulk of my fan base is people who were ready to hate in the 90s. Mm-hmm. That was like a touch point for them. When I'm at a comic convention and I see a late middle-aged white guy with graying hair coming down, I go, here comes my fan. And I'm always right. If it's, I almost faint if anybody under the age of 30 stops at my table. There was this one, just at this one comic convention, there was this girl, she might have even still be in high school, but late teens. She had the total goth look going on. She was there with her very square family. Her little brother's going nuts over the man who's dressed up like Spider-Man. And she kind of is like walking away from her parents, and her parents are just loving everything. So this girl just comes up at my table. She's looking at everything, and I'm like, this is weird, because this never happens. I go, this is really strange. And I'm wondering what she's going to say. And she just went, and again, she's very goth, very dark, and she just goes, your stuff is the only stuff here that doesn't suck. But I can't remember if she bought anything. She may not have. That's the biggest problem with comics, is it's still, it's an object, and people have to reach in their pocket, pull out money, and pay for it. Or pay for it online. And everybody, including myself, we've gotten so used to free entertainment. You go on to the internet, and you could just look at free stuff and listen to free stuff all day long. Why pay for anything? There's no reason to pay for a single thing. Not only is there lots of things to read, see, and do online for free, there's tons of great stuff to read, see, and do. So that's the really tricky thing. I know for Fantagraphics in particular, it was a big thing with them to do very elaborate formats, like with 20 million or those long, skinny things. And the wild different formats of Chris Ware, although I think Chris Ware was doing that solely for his own benefit, for his own aesthetic reasons, and not to compete with the free stuff on the internet. But Fantagraphics, Eric Reynolds told me we were specifically competing with it. We were trying, with the formats, we did want to make it look super unique. And it's ridiculous because we were thinking people are going to buy these books for that reason alone. It's like, oh, this is interesting. It's coffee table material, but this format's so weird. I'll put it on my coffee table, and then my guests will say, what a weird shaped book. but you can't, the internet can't provide a weird shaped book. But then I can remember they ran into a big problem with, I don't know if this is still an issue, although I've noticed Fantagraphics is doing a lot less of the crazy formats. But then they had a problem with Amazon. Amazon was complaining about packaging those books. They were, at one point, I think they were insisting that all publishers use standard formats, standard sizes of formats, because they're not gonna make cardboard containers just for 20 millionaires comics. Well, that'd be amazing if they did. All the different sizes, 20 millionaire size.
And then collecting the boxes will be the next thing. Oh, did you get a...
Yeah, that's funny. Put that on your coffee table. Put the Amazon logo on it. Look what I have.
Hate is fad.